What happens when one of Hollywood's quietest legends finally decides he's had enough and says it live on national television? The cameras were rolling. The audience was smiling. The hosts of The View were ready for another polished celebrity interview. But within minutes, the atmosphere inside the studio shifted so dramatically that even producers backstage reportedly froze in silence. And at the center of it all was Keanu Reeves, calm, composed, almost unreadable, sitting across from Sonny Hostin with a look that viewers would later describe online as the moment everything changed. Before we dive into this unbelievable confrontation, make sure you subscribe to the Echo View, hit that like button, and comment below with where you're watching from, because this story only gets more intense from here. The studio lights glowed against the polished table as the audience applauded Keanu's entrance. He walked out with his usual humble smile, dressed in a dark blazer and black boots, waving softly as fans stood to their feet. Even the host seemed unusually excited. Keanu rarely appeared on daytime television anymore, and when he did, he usually avoided controversy completely. But there was something different about him that morning. Not anger, not nervousness, something heavier. The interview began normally enough. The hosts joked about his movies, his motorcycles, his reputation as Hollywood's nicest man. Keanu answered politely, smiling when expected, nodding quietly while the crowd laughed at harmless stories from film sets. But Sonny Hostin leaned forward with the kind of expression viewers recognized immediately. The one that meant she was about to steer the conversation somewhere more personal. "So Keanu," she said smoothly, crossing one leg over the other, "people have always viewed you as this untouchable figure. Quiet, mysterious, kind. But lately there's been conversation online that staying silent during difficult cultural conversations is a privilege." The audience reaction was immediate. Not loud, just a strange murmur. Even the other hosts glanced sideways. Keanu's smile faded slightly. He folded his hands together. "Well," he answered carefully, "I don't really see silence as privilege. Sometimes silence is listening." A few audience members applauded softly. Sonny smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "But isn't there also responsibility?" she pressed. "Especially when millions of people admire you. Some people feel celebrities who stay neutral are avoiding accountability." The tension in the room thickened. One producer near the stage slowly lowered their headset. Keanu inhaled slowly before answering. "I don't think compassion always needs an announcement," he said quietly. That line hit the room differently. The audience clapped harder this time. Sonny nodded, but viewers could already sense the shift happening beneath the surface. The conversation was no longer promotional. It was becoming personal. "And yet," Sonny continued, her tone sharpening slightly, "there are younger actors today speaking out constantly, taking risks publicly. Some critics say older stars built careers benefiting from staying comfortable." One audible gasp escaped somewhere in the audience. Keanu blinked once. The camera caught him leaning back slightly in his chair. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Whoopi Goldberg jumped in carefully, sensing the temperature rise. "Well, everybody handles visibility differently." But Sonny wasn't done. "I'm just saying," she interrupted gently, "being beloved by the public sometimes protects people from criticism others would face." Online clips later slowed down the exact moment Keanu's expression changed. Not dramatically. That was the unsettling part. His face didn't explode with anger. It became still. Too still. And suddenly the audience realized this wasn't the version of Keanu Reeves they were used to seeing. He looked directly at Sonny. Not aggressively, but directly. "You know," he said slowly, "I've spent most of my life trying to avoid becoming noise." The room went silent. Sonny maintained her smile. "And what does that mean?" Keanu paused. "It means I've buried friends without cameras present. I've lost family without posting statements online. I've helped people privately because I didn't think kindness was performance." The audience erupted into applause. Not polite applause. Real applause. The kind that interrupts a live show. Sonny tried to respond, but the crowd kept clapping louder. One audience member even stood up. Keanu didn't acknowledge them. He just kept looking calmly at the table. When the applause finally faded, Sonny adjusted her posture. "No one's questioning your personal tragedies," she said carefully. "But public influence matters." "And so does humanity," Keanu replied instantly. That surprised everyone, because he didn't usually interrupt people. The energy inside the studio completely shifted now. Even Joy Behar stopped smirking. Sarah Haynes glanced nervously toward the producers off stage. Something unscripted was unfolding in real time. Sunny folded her hands. So you think public accountability is performative? No, Keanu answered. I think forcing everyone to communicate pain the same way is dangerous. Another wave of applause. This time even louder. Sunny's expression tightened. But nobody's forcing you. Yes, Keanu said quietly, still calm. Sometimes they are. Dead silence. The camera zoomed closer. You can feel people demanding statements before they ask if someone's okay. Demanding outrage before understanding. Demanding performance before sincerity. Even the audience seemed afraid to breathe now. Keanu leaned forward slightly. And honestly, he continued, voice low, I think we've created a culture where being loud is mistaken for being good. The studio exploded. Gasps. Applause. Someone in the back yelled, Tell the truth. Sunny looked stunned for the first time all interview. Whoopi immediately raised her hands, trying to settle the crowd. All right. But the atmosphere had already changed too much. Sunny attempted to regain control. Well, some would argue silence protects systems. Keanu nodded slowly. And some would argue outrage has become entertainment. That line hit like lightning. Even Joy Behar's eyes widened. The audience reaction was instant chaos, applause mixed with shocked laughter and stunned expressions. Producers backstage could be seen whispering urgently near the cameras. For the first time in years, one of Hollywood's most reserved stars wasn't dodging confrontation. He was walking directly into it. And somehow, his calmness made it even more intense. Sunny leaned back, clearly frustrated now. So are you accusing people of being fake activists? Keanu shook his head gently. No, I'm saying humanity is becoming transactional. People are rewarded for appearing morally correct instead of actually being compassionate. The audience exploded again. Several people stood up clapping. Whoopi looked genuinely stunned now, staring at Keanu like she was trying to figure out where this version of him had been hiding all these years. Sunny's voice became colder. That sounds convenient coming from someone universally adored. Keanu finally smiled again. But it wasn't the soft smile from the beginning. It looked tired. You think being loved protects people? He asked quietly. The room froze. And suddenly, the interview no longer felt like television. It felt personal. Very personal. Keanu's eyes drifted toward the audience for a brief second before returning to Sunny. You know what fame actually does? He asked softly. It makes people assume you're emotionally bulletproof. Nobody interrupted him now. Nobody dared. You stop being treated like a person. You become an expectation. The silence inside the studio became almost uncomfortable. Even Sunny seemed uncertain whether to challenge him again. But then she did. So what exactly are you trying to say here, Keanu? He stared at the table for a moment, then back at her. And when he answered, his voice dropped so low the audience leaned forward just to hear it. I'm saying people don't survive by turning their soul into a public product. The crowd erupted again. And backstage, producers were already realizing this interview was about to become one of the most talked about moments daytime television had seen in years. The applause refused to die down. Even after the cameras briefly cut to the audience, people were still clapping, some shaking their heads in disbelief at what they had just witnessed. The energy inside the studio had transformed from daytime entertainment into something far more unpredictable. Producers whispered frantically into headsets. One camera operator exchanged a nervous glance with another as the control room struggled to decide whether to steer the interview back towards safe territory. But it was already too late. Keanu Reeves had stopped speaking like a celebrity promoting a movie. He was speaking like a man who had spent years swallowing thoughts he was finally ready to release. And everyone could feel it. Across the table, Sunny Hostin maintained her professional smile, but there was tension in her posture now. Her fingers tapped lightly against her mug as she searched for a way to regain control of the conversation. You're obviously passionate about this, she said carefully. But people watching at home could interpret your words as dismissive toward those using their platforms to fight for change. Keanu nodded immediately. I understand that. Then why say it this way? Sunny pressed. Keanu exhaled slowly before answering. Because I think we've started punishing sincerity. That sentence hung over the studio like smoke. A few audience members murmured quietly. Sunny tilted her head. Explain that. Keanu leaned back slightly in his chair, thoughtful now, almost reflective. When someone speaks imperfectly, he said, people rush to destroy them instead of understand them. When someone chooses privacy, people accuse them of hiding something. When someone struggles emotionally, they're told to make it public immediately, or they're not considered authentic. His voice remained calm, but the calmness somehow made every word hit harder. And eventually, he continued, people stop being human. They become performances designed to survive public judgment. The audience applauded again, though softer this time. Less excitement, more emotional agreement. Even Whoopi Goldberg looked unusually quiet now, resting her chin against her hand as she listened. Sunny crossed her arms subtly. But accountability matters too, she said. There are real consequences when influential people stay vague during serious moments. Keanu nodded. There are also consequences when fear replaces conversation. Another silence. Longer this time. Then Joy Behar finally jumped in, trying to ease the tension with humor. Well, this got deeper than I expected before lunch, she joked nervously. A few audience members laughed, but Keanu barely reacted. His eyes looked distant now, like he wasn't even seeing the studio anymore. You know something strange about fame? He asked quietly. Nobody interrupted. The world starts confusing access with ownership. Sunny frowned slightly. What does that mean? It means strangers begin believing they deserve your pain on demand. That line sent chills across the audience. Several people visibly leaned back in their seats. Keanu continued before anyone could respond. I lost people I loved long before social media existed. Back then, grief was something private. Now people expect public displays immediately. Statements. Reactions. Perfect wording. And if you don't provide it fast enough, he paused. They turn on you. Sunny's expression softened slightly for the first time. But only slightly. Well, she replied carefully. Some people would say visibility helps others feel less alone. Keanu nodded respectfully. And sometimes it does. Then he looked directly at her again. But pain shouldn't become currency. The audience exploded once more. Louder than before. One woman near the front row wiped tears from her eyes while clapping. Another man shook his head slowly, whispering, Wow. Backstage, producers were now openly pacing, because the interview was spiraling into territory nobody had prepared for. Sunny tried again. But when celebrities remain silent during difficult issues, younger audiences feel abandoned. Keanu's jaw tightened slightly. Not anger. Exhaustion. Younger audiences are drowning in noise, he replied. What they need isn't more performance. They need honesty. The audience roared. Sunny inhaled sharply. So everyone speaking publicly is performing? No, Keanu said firmly. But many people are terrified. That caught everyone off guard. Even Sunny blinked. Terrified of what? Keanu's answer came instantly. Being destroyed. Dead silence. The camera zoomed slowly toward him. You say one wrong thing now, he continued. And suddenly millions of people decide who you are forever. No context. No conversation. No forgiveness. The audience sat frozen. And the scariest part? Keanu asked softly. Some people enjoy it. A ripple moved through the crowd. Nobody laughed now. Nobody even shifted in their seats. Sunny leaned forward carefully. So you believe society has become cruel? Keanu looked down briefly before answering. I think people are lonely, he said quietly. And hurt people sometimes mistake punishment for justice. That sentence landed like a punch to the chest. Even the hosts fell silent. For several seconds, all anyone could hear was the faint hum of studio lights overhead. Then suddenly Sunny spoke again. But critics would say this perspective comes from someone protected by wealth and admiration. There it was, the sharpest comment yet. A visible reaction swept through the audience. Some groaned quietly. Others turned toward Sunny in shock. But Keanu didn't flinch. Instead, he gave a slow nod. You think money protects grief? He asked gently. Sunny hesitated. That's not what I said. But it's what people imply, Keanu replied. That success cancels suffering. The audience clapped again. Slower now. Heavier. Keanu's voice grew quieter with every sentence, forcing the entire studio to lean in closer. I've met homeless people with more peace than famous people, he said. I've met powerful people terrified to sleep alone. Fame doesn't heal wounds. Sometimes it amplifies them. Whoopi finally spoke, her voice unusually soft. That's true. Everyone turned toward her. Whoopi rarely surrendered control of a conversation like this. But even she seemed emotionally caught in the moment. Sunny looked between them, clearly realizing the audience was shifting further toward Keanu with every passing minute. Still, she refused to back down. So what's the answer then? She challenged. If public accountability is flawed, if social pressure is flawed, what are people supposed to do? Keanu looked at her for a long moment, then finally answered, start seeing each other as human beings again. The audience erupted into thunderous applause. Some people stood. Others shouted support. One producer backstage reportedly muttered, "This is going viral before the episode even ends." Sunny forced a smile. But humanity also means criticism. Yes, Keanu agreed instantly. But criticism without compassion becomes cruelty. Another roar from the audience. At this point, the atmosphere inside the studio felt almost electric. Not hostile exactly, just emotionally overloaded. Nobody expected a daytime celebrity interview to become a philosophical confrontation about fame, morality, and modern culture. And yet somehow, that's exactly what it had become. Sunny adjusted her microphone slowly. Then she asked the question that changed everything. Can I ask you something honestly, Keanu? He nodded. Have you been holding this in for years? The audience went completely silent. Keanu stared at her. For the first time all interview, his composure cracked. Not dramatically, just enough. His eyes shifted downward. His shoulders lowered slightly. And when he finally answered, his voice sounded almost fragile. Yeah, he admitted quietly. Probably longer than I realized. The entire room softened instantly. Even Sunny's expression changed. Because suddenly this wasn't about politics, or celebrity culture, or social media. It was about a man who had spent decades carrying grief, pressure, loneliness, and expectation behind one of Hollywood's most famous smiles. And for the first time, he was letting the world see it. For several seconds after his confession, nobody spoke. Not the audience, not the hosts, not even the producers whispering backstage. The studio sat suspended in a silence so heavy it almost felt sacred. Keanu Reeves looked down at his hands, as if he regretted letting that much truth slip out on live television. But at the same time, there was something else in his expression now. Relief. Years of carefully measured interviews. Years of smiling politely through shallow questions. Years of protecting his private pain behind calm answers. And now the wall had cracked. Across the table, Sunny Hostin seemed unsure how to continue. Her posture had softened, but the tension in the room still lingered like static electricity, waiting for another spark. Finally, she cleared her throat. Well, I appreciate your honesty. Keanu nodded politely, but the emotional momentum inside the studio had already become impossible to stop. One audience member suddenly shouted, "We love you, Keanu." The crowd immediately burst into applause again. Keanu smiled faintly and gave a small wave of appreciation, though his eyes still looked distant. Whoopi leaned forward carefully. You know, she said, people probably connect with you because you don't pretend to have everything figured out. Keanu looked toward her and gave a tired smile. I definitely don't. A few soft laughs moved through the audience. The tension eased for barely a moment. Then Sunny asked another question, and the room tightened all over again. But do you think your silence sometimes allowed people to project anything they wanted onto you? Keanu turned toward her slowly. That's true, he admitted. And does that responsibility bother you? He paused, then nodded once. Every day. That answer surprised everyone. Sunny seemed caught off guard by how quickly he admitted it. Keanu leaned forward slightly now, elbows resting against the table. The strange thing about being publicly admired, he said quietly, is that eventually people stop seeing you clearly. They create versions of you in their minds. The audience listened in complete silence. And some of those versions are impossible to live up to. Sunny studied him carefully. So the nicest man in Hollywood label bothers you? Keanu gave a small laugh under his breath. It scares me. A visible reaction rippled through the crowd. Why? Sunny asked. Because people forget you're human, he answered immediately. They stop allowing mistakes. They stop imagining you can struggle emotionally. They turn you into an idea instead of a person. Whoopi nodded slowly. That's real. Keanu continued, voice calm but increasingly emotional beneath the surface. And once people turn you into an idea, they punish you for failing their fantasy. The audience broke into applause again. But this applause sounded different. Not excitement. Recognition. Like people suddenly saw parts of themselves in what he was saying. Sunny folded her hands together. But some would argue celebrities benefit enormously from public attention. We do, Keanu admitted instantly. But benefits and emotional costs can exist together. That line hit hard. Even Joy Behar stopped trying to jump in with jokes now. The hosts were no longer controlling the interview. They were following it, and Keanu was leading without even trying. Sunny hesitated before asking her next question. When you say you've been holding this in for years, what exactly do you mean? The audience leaned forward. Keanu looked toward the crowd briefly before answering. He paused carefully. I think I got tired of watching people lose themselves trying to survive public approval. The room remained dead silent. I've seen actors become anxious every second of every day. I've seen people terrified to speak honestly because one clip online can destroy their careers. I've seen kindness become branding, vulnerability become marketing. His voice tightened slightly. And after a while, you start wondering if anyone remembers how to just be real anymore. A woman in the audience whispered, "Wow." Sunny crossed her legs slowly. But social media also gave people voices they never had before. Keanu nodded respectfully. It did. Then he added quietly. But it also gave cruelty an audience. The crowd erupted again. Loud applause echoed across the studio while producers backstage exchanged worried looks. They already knew clips from this interview were spreading online in real time. Hashtags were probably exploding already. And the interview wasn't even over. Sunny exhaled slowly, trying to maintain composure. You seem deeply disappointed in modern culture. Keanu shook his head. No. The audience quieted again. I'm disappointed in what fear does to people. That answer stopped everyone cold. Keanu's eyes drifted toward the audience again. People are scared constantly now, he continued. Scared of being judged. Scared of being excluded. Scared of saying the wrong thing. Scared of being hated by strangers. His tone remained soft. But the softness carried more weight than shouting ever could. And fear changes people, he said. It makes them harsher, less forgiving, less patient. Sunny looked thoughtful now rather than confrontational. So what do you do with that fear? Keanu smiled sadly. I ride motorcycles, he joked quietly. The audience burst into laughter, grateful for the release. Even Sunny laughed. But then Keanu's smile faded again. And honestly, he added softly, sometimes I disappear. That sentence hit differently. Whoopi tilted her head slightly. Disappear? Keanu nodded. I leave Hollywood for a while. I stay away from cameras. I spend time alone. Because if you stay inside the noise too long, he paused, you forget who you are. The audience fell silent once more. Sunny's voice softened. Have you forgotten who you are before? Keanu looked at her for a long time. And for the first time all interview, real pain surfaced visibly in his face. Yes, he admitted quietly. The studio became absolutely still. No applause. No movement. Nothing. Keanu swallowed slowly before continuing. There were years where grief consumed everything. Years where I smiled publicly while feeling completely disconnected privately. Several audience members looked emotional now. One woman near the front wiped tears from her face. I think a lot of people do that, Keanu said gently. Not just celebrities. Sunny nodded slowly. That's true. And the dangerous part, Keanu continued, is that the world rewards the performance. Another silence. You can be falling apart inside, he said, but if you look okay online, people assume you are okay. That line visibly affected the room. Even Sunny looked emotional now. The confrontation that began with tension had evolved into something nobody expected. A brutally honest conversation about loneliness, identity, grief, and emotional survival in the modern world. But then, Sunny asked one final question, and it changed the atmosphere instantly. Do you think Hollywood is fake? A few gasps escaped the audience. Whoopi looked sideways immediately. Joy Behar raised her eyebrows. Even the producers backstage seemed to freeze again. Keanu stared at Sunny carefully. The pause lasted so long it became uncomfortable. Then finally he answered. I think Hollywood is full of frightened people pretending they're not frightened. The audience exploded. Some clapped wildly. Others gasped. A few stood up immediately. Sunny looked stunned by how direct he had become. But Keanu wasn't finished. And honestly, he continued calmly, I don't even blame them anymore. The room quieted again instantly. Because this industry can make people believe they only deserve love when they're useful. That sentence landed like an emotional earthquake. Whoopi slowly leaned back in her chair. Sunny stared at Keanu silently now. And somewhere backstage, a producer reportedly whispered the words everyone watching at home was already thinking. This interview just became television history. By the time the final commercial break ended, The atmosphere inside the view no longer felt like daytime television. It felt like the aftermath of something irreversible. The audience sat quieter now, emotionally drained from the intensity of the conversation they had just witnessed. Even the studio lights seemed harsher somehow, exposing expressions the cameras normally missed. Nervous producers near the stage, audience members still whispering to each other, hosts visibly trying to regroup before going live again. And at the center of it all sat Keanu Reeves. Still calm, still composed, but no longer guarded. The cameras rolled, a red light flashed, and suddenly millions of viewers across the country were back inside the moment. Whoopi Goldberg cleared her throat softly, attempting to reset the tone. Well, this has definitely been one of the most honest conversations we've had at this table. A wave of applause moved through the audience. Keanu smiled politely, but across from him, Sonny Hostin still looked unsettled. Not angry anymore, just thoughtful, almost shaken by how deeply the interview had spiraled beyond its original intention. She looked toward Keanu carefully. "I'll admit something," she said quietly. "I didn't expect this conversation to go where it did." A few nervous laughs echoed through the crowd. Keanu nodded slightly. "Neither did I." That honesty earned another burst of applause. Sonny folded her hands together, speaking more carefully now than at any other point during the interview. "But maybe that's part of why people are reacting so strongly," she admitted. "Because we rarely see people talk this openly anymore." Keanu looked down briefly before answering. "Most people are exhausted." The room fell silent again. "Exhausted from pretending," he added quietly. The audience clapped instantly. Not loud this time, just emotional. The kind of applause that comes from recognition rather than entertainment. Sonny stared at him for a moment. "And what happens if people stop pretending?" Keanu leaned back slowly, thinking carefully about his answer. "Maybe they start forgiving each other again." That line spread through the studio like a wave. Several audience members visibly reacted. One man shook his head slowly while clapping. A woman near the back covered her mouth with her hand as tears filled her eyes. Whoopi smiled softly. "That's probably the deepest thing anybody's said on this show all year." The audience laughed and applauded. For the first time since the confrontation began, the tension eased completely. But outside the studio, the internet was already exploding. Backstage producers stared at phones lighting up with notifications faster than they could read them. Clips of Keanu's comments were spreading across every platform imaginable. Viewers were reposting his lines with captions like, "He said what everyone's been feeling." Keanu Reeves just broke Hollywood's silence. "This doesn't even feel scripted." Within minutes, major entertainment pages began covering the interview. Comment sections turned into emotional debates about celebrity culture, public pressure, mental health, and authenticity in the modern world. Some people praised Keanu for speaking honestly. Others accused him of criticizing activism and accountability. But almost everyone agreed on one thing. Nobody expected the quietest man in Hollywood to deliver one of the most emotionally raw television moments of the year. Back at the table, Sonny took a slow breath before speaking again. "You know, I challenged you pretty hard today." Keanu smiled faintly. "You did. And yet," she continued carefully, "I respect that you answered honestly." Keanu nodded. "I respect the questions." That response visibly surprised her. "You do?" "Yes," he said calmly. "Conversations matter, even uncomfortable ones." The audience applauded loudly. Whoopi pointed toward Keanu jokingly. "See, that's why people love you." The crowd erupted into cheers. Keanu laughed softly, shaking his head. But then his expression shifted again. More serious now. "There's something I think people forget," he said quietly. The audience immediately settled. "Every person you argue with is carrying something you can't see." Dead silence. Keanu looked toward Sonny briefly before continuing. "Pain, fear, loneliness, regret. Everyone's carrying something." Sonny's eyes lowered slightly. "And social media trained us to stop seeing that," he added. "We react before understanding." The audience sat frozen again, hanging on every word. "I'm not perfect," Keanu admitted. "I've failed people before. I've withdrawn from people. I've disappeared when I shouldn't have." The honesty in his voice made the room ache. But I think the world becomes dangerous when compassion disappears. A standing ovation erupted across the studio. Not from everyone. From almost everyone. People stood clapping while some wiped tears from their eyes. Even several crew members backstage joined the applause quietly behind the cameras. Sonny remained seated for a moment before eventually clapping too. Slowly, thoughtfully, and somehow that moment became one of the most talked about images online afterward. Sonny Hostin applauding the very man she had challenged so intensely only an hour earlier. Whoopi smiled toward the audience. Well, I think we all needed this conversation. Cheers filled the studio. Keanu looked overwhelmed now, though he tried not to show it. The applause continued for nearly 30 straight seconds. Long enough that producers stopped trying to cut it off. Long enough that the emotion in the room became impossible to fake. And then finally, as the noise softened, Whoopi turned toward Keanu one last time. Any final thought before we go? Keanu looked around the studio slowly. At the audience. At the hosts. At the cameras broadcasting him into millions of homes. Then he answered with a quietness so sincere the entire room leaned in to hear him. Be careful with each other. Silence. Complete silence. People are hurting more than they admit. The audience erupted into one final wave of applause so loud it nearly drowned out the ending music. The cameras slowly pulled back as the hosts thanked viewers for watching, but online, the conversation was only beginning. Within hours, clips from the interview had accumulated millions of views. News outlets debated whether Keanu had called out modern culture. Psychologists online praised parts of his comments about emotional exhaustion and public pressure. Celebrities subtly reacted through cryptic posts and interviews. Some agreed with him openly. Others criticized him for oversimplifying complicated issues. But regardless of opinion, one truth remained undeniable. People couldn't stop talking about it. Because for one shocking hour of live television, Hollywood polish disappeared. No rehearsed sound bites. No perfectly controlled PR answers. Just a quiet man finally speaking honestly about the emotional cost of living in a world addicted to judgment. And somehow, that honesty hit harder than outrage ever could. So what do you think? Was Keanu Reeves right about modern culture and public pressure? Or did Sonny Hostin make stronger points during the confrontation? Comment your opinion below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for the Echo View for more explosive celebrity drama, emotional confrontations, and unforgettable stories from inside Hollywood.